So thank you for joining us tonight for 3 practical strategies for UXR impact. I am delighted to introduce y'all to Ruby Pryor. Ruby is the founder of Rex, a UX research and strategic design consulting firm, and she is on a mission to make continuous discovery a reality for every organization. Ruby has worked in design and customer experience for a decade across Australia and Asia. Her previous experience includes working for Boston Consulting Group, Grab, and Nous Group, and I probably pronounced that incorrectly. She's spoken at UX conferences in 6 countries, and she's most recently uncovered that Taylor Swift has a hidden UXR agenda. I don't know if you saw her post, but she put together a really great playlist of some of T Swift's songs that seem like they really are UXR topics. So welcome, Ruby. We're so excited to hear from you tonight.
Thank you so much. I'm super excited to be here. And I love that Taylor Swift now gets mentioned in my introduction. I am a huge, huge fan. And when I was listening to her song Question on the album Midnights, I was really thinking about it as a UX researcher, like all the questions that she asked. And I was thinking, is that an open question? Is that a leading question? And it then led to writing a LinkedIn post about it. But I'd love to do one where I analyze that song line by line as well. I think the best question in that song is, and then what did you do?
Oh,
Nice, open, lots of space to go.
such a good. I'd love to see that article. We hope you do.
All right, it's on the list. So thank you all so much for having me in this session. I'm super excited to see folks from so many different corners of the world. And I know that we have um, someone from Malaysia I saw in the chat, Sonia, which is like really exciting. Love to see people who are my neighbors. I live here in Bangkok, Thailand, where I've been for about 6 months. And prior to that, I lived in Singapore for 5.5 years as well. So it's incredibly lovely to meet you. And I want to share a little bit about my background because it's going to help explain how I've come to talk about what I talk about online and in sessions like this. So the majority of my professional career has actually been in management consulting firms. I was a management consultant back in Australia at an Australian firm called Nous Group. And then I moved to Boston Consulting Group in Singapore, where I worked as a strategic designer. And management consultants are super interesting. And I would say that consultants really don't shy away from measuring stuff. They're really happy to try and quantify the unquantifiable, and then to even go one step further and to try and put a dollar value on things that at first glance might seem like very difficult to do that with. So consultants are always talking about numbers, they're always talking about value. And when I got my first in-house role in Singapore as a UX researcher, I was really curious about the fact that I seemed to have brought in this skill set that wasn't as universal among folks in UX. It was really my first like true tech in-house UX role. And I think a lot of your experience when you're in kind of a new role and a new situation is working out which of your skills are sort of the standard ones that everyone here has and which of your skills are distinct. And I think I had a bunch of distinct skills around this ability to talk about value, how it was captured, how it was created, and to also quantify it. And as I started doing more projects, there were a couple where I really thought, I know I'm making money for this organization, or I know I'm saving money for this organization, but I can't really see us having this discussion. And so I started thinking about it more and more. This all was very much catalyzed for me, however, after I got laid off. I know many folks here on the call have gone through a similar experience. I'm no different. I got laid off. And it really lit a fire under me to talk more about this stuff online. I felt this kind of burning desire to share the thinking that I had started around value and around impact with the hope that it would arm more folks in our profession to have these discussions with their teams and with their stakeholders to really demonstrate the value that we are all creating. And I brought forward a lot of this ethos and this thinking as I started my own company as well and teaching courses on this stuff, having these conversations more and more in public. So of course, would love to connect with all of you on LinkedIn as well, where I write about this stuff very regularly. So I want to start this presentation by talking about where we find ourselves as researchers at the start of 2025, because I think the landscape has shifted and changed so much over the last couple of years. And then in the second half of the presentation, I want to talk more specifically about the strategies that we can use to demonstrate our impact considering this changing landscape. So here are the three trends that I've very much noticed. Very lean research teams, remote research is here to stay, and more research, question mark. So very lean research teams. I think this is not going to come as a surprise to anyone who is here on this call. We have seen so many layoffs in the last couple of years. There was, of course, this kind of huge peak during the tech winter. And if you really zoom in on this graph, you could even see myself kind of represented down here as one of these layoffs. So across tech, we know that there have been so many layoffs in all of the disciplines in our field. And if you look at it just by the numbers, the source for this is the quarter inch hole, and you can see it on the bottom of the screen. It looks like engineering was really the hardest hit when it comes to the layoffs. And by the numbers zoomed out, engineering really was the kind of gross number of people laid off from that discipline was higher than any of the others. But we have to think about it from a comparative perspective. So when we look at the most common ratio of researchers to designers to developers, Nielsen-Norman Group suggests that it often looks like this, that for every 50 developers, we're going to have 5 designers and 1 researcher. So there are many fewer researchers in an organization compared to designers, compared to developers. So when we go back with this kind of mindset and look at the data, it suggests that 3 times as many researchers were laid off than expected, about 3 for every 5 designers. When if we go back to our ratio here, we would expect it to be only 1 for every 5 designers. So we can see that UX research as a profession really was quite impacted by the layoffs across tech. And it doesn't look like that the market has quite recovered yet. So I acknowledge this data isn't fully up to date now, but after this huge surge in hiring across all of our disciplines, it doesn't seem like the market has yet gone back to where it was previously. And of course, it's a question about will it ever? This may be the aberration, this point here in the end of 2021, and we may be settling into a baseline that's much more common to, for example, 2019. What the future of hiring, what the future of team sizes looks like right now is still very much up for debate. But for my money, it seems like lean research teams are likely here to stay. It seems like that those of us who are in-house or in agencies are going to have to do more with less. And it seems like we have to continue to find ways to communicate our value broadly. And when I say broadly, I mean we have to go further than just our immediate stakeholders. I think it's very common for folks in UX and in tech more broadly to communicate a lot with other stakeholders in tech. And any organization of size is also going to have a whole other part of the business that doesn't really focus on the product, but very much focuses on the business. You're going to have, of course, operations teams, but you are definitely going to have like business teams. And there'll be people here that are doing things around strategy, that are probably very focused on managing P&Ls. And often I find folks in tech can get quite kind of siloed talking to other folks in tech and not necessarily building bridges to the rest of the organization. And if you can find ways to do that, it can just really increase your impact and your ability to get things done, because so many of our initiatives actually require coordination of many different parts of the organization. So thinking about communicating our value more broadly and thinking really critically about which stakeholders we really do need to involve to make sure that we're communicating the right stuff to the right people. So that was trend 1. Trend 2, I think remote research is here to stay. So this is going to be a bit of a throwback maybe to those of you that have been in the profession for kind of 10 years plus like me. But I used to say this to the teams that I worked with. If you're not going to do this in person, you may as well not do it. This was very much the ethos around UX research in the like 2010s. So obviously COVID changed everything, and it needed to. Of course, we needed to change the way that we were working to deal with the pandemic. But before the pandemic, it was very common to have conversations with anyone who was working in human-centered design or in UX that we needed to do this in person. We have to see the users face to face. We have to see their environment. We have to understand where this product or where this problem fits in their broader landscape. We have to go to their home or to their office or to somewhere that's really meaningful to them. And I went all over the place and did research in some totally different environments to the office in which I worked in person 5 days a week. And this was just a really common way of operating. And even if it meant getting on a plane, even if it meant field work took a lot longer, we would do it in person. What is the impact of that on our profession now? Like I said, of course, that needed to pivot. And I also think that any opinion that's incredibly strongly held should be interrogated. And I think it's a good thing that our profession had a moment where we went the other way and had to really grapple with doing research fully online. Now is a really great moment when many of us have more freedom of movement again to think about what is actually the right balance. Because remote research, I think, does have broader impact for our profession. One of which may be, is it less visible to stakeholders? And I'm fully prepared for the answer to this to be no. Like, it could be more visible. You can have potentially more people dialing into a session. You can potentially have people from more different offices or more different parts of the business actually coming to the sessions live and seeing customers and hearing from them directly in a session live. So maybe remote research is actually more visible to stakeholders. But I could argue that it also is less visible to stakeholders. You often hear less about the sessions happening. They might not be in the office in like a UX research lab like they could be when it's in person. You potentially don't have as many like amazing kind of images and videos and photos coming out of the sessions in the same way you often do when they're in person. So I think the visibility of remote research versus in-person research is definitely worth interrogating. And visibility really matters. Like, for stakeholders to see you doing the work actually does matter. And we may not want it to matter, but there is something in this that is really important, that people see that you're doing something interesting and something unique that feels very different to the work that they are doing. And then secondly, what does it mean for the focus on the tools versus focus on the craft? So I think when you have any skill that seems to other people like it becomes very reliant on pieces of technology, it then feels like it's easier for someone else or another program to step in and do that job for you. So it would be very hard, for example, for an AI to go out into the field and do observational ethnography. Very difficult. However, it may be a lot easier, or maybe it's already happening, that AI can conduct a 1 hour one-on-one depth interview remotely via Zoom. So I think it is worth questioning what remote research means for the broader implications of our profession. I'm not saying we need to change it 100%. I'm just saying that we should think about what it means for our profession and is it the right call in studies that we're doing. So is it time to reconsider? Maybe not, maybe yes. And the last trend that I have noticed is more quote unquote research. The first thing I want to talk about under this heading is continuous discovery. So continuous discovery is this idea of particularly product teams talking to customers every week, using the insights they find from these conversations to feed back into the product work that they're doing, into the decisions that they're making. Now, I think it is fantastic to have more people in an organization talk to customers more regularly. I'm never going to argue that that is a bad thing. But we do need to acknowledge that talking to customers and doing research are not necessarily the same thing. Talking to customers is extremely valuable. Nothing just builds kind of a grounding in empathy as much as really spending time with people who are grappling with the problem you are trying to solve, people who are using the product that you are also working on. That is invaluable. And I think absolutely we should have more teams doing more of that. But that is not the same thing as doing research. Doing research requires us to have very well thought through hypotheses. It requires us to have well-structured discussion guides and questions that we've really thought about and interrogated ahead of time. It requires a level of skill and nuance to be able to use that discussion guide to ask the right questions at the right time. And of course, the analysis and the formulation from data to insights takes a lot of skill and experience as well. And my concern is when companies do more talking to customers, that doesn't always mean they're doing more research and doesn't always mean they're creating more insights. And of course, the second trend under this kind of research or research-like activities is AI in research. Now, at its best, AI in the profession of research is remarkable. It is an accelerator for skilled professionals to do higher quality work faster at its best. At its worst, it can be a stand-in for doing research at all. You can have folks just asking ChatGPT to come up with a set of personas or to come up with a set of pain points or come up with a set of unmet needs or journey maps or what have you. And that is no substitute for doing real research. So I think AI in research can kind of go anyway, and I'm sure everyone on the call has seen their own examples of where it's been used incredibly successfully and where it's been used less successfully. But it's definitely under this guise of kind of generating more stuff that's related to research. But at the end of the day, this is my question. Even if we have more research-like activities happening, do we actually have more insights? Are we actually learning uniquely new things about our users and our customers? But then even if we have more insights, do we actually have more action? Any of you who are working in an organization of any kind of size know how difficult it can be to get things done. And I think sometimes when we have these ethos of something like kind of weekly talking to customer sessions, the idea that we would come up with new insights about our customers weekly that then we can act on weekly is not something that I've seen most large organizations really been able to handle. Things take much longer than a week to change. They need to be signed off, often by many different teams, often by many different levels of leadership. And these processes just take a lot of time. And there's always a risk with generating more insights than your organization can actually use. That can end up feeling like quite frustrating to teams that you're working with. So it's very much worth thinking about, even if through using different methodologies and different tools, we were able to generate more insights, could we actually generate more action? So I think this is the landscape in which we find ourselves in January 2025. Very lean research teams, remote research is here to stay, and more quote unquote research. So what does this mean for impact? What does this mean for all of us who are UX researchers or working in UX who want to make more impact? These are my 3 strategies for creating more impact. The first one is to track and quantify your impact. The second one is writing matters. And then the third one is time your insights. So number 1, track and quantify your impact. The first thing we need if we're going to do this effectively is a framework to really understand what do we mean when we say impact. And this is my framework where I argue that UX researchers create impact at 4 levels in an organization. The most foundational layer is insights. This is the idea that researchers are creating net new knowledge about our customers. Researchers are also helping folks in an organization understand knowledge that we have already about our customers and facilitating access to that knowledge. So generating new insights and helping an organization understand the knowledge we have already. One layer up from that is optimization. This is the idea that researchers are helping make the products your organization has already launched better. We're helping make those products less confusing. We're helping making them more delightful, more lovable, more special. Whatever it is, we're helping an organization optimize a product that exists already. One layer up from that is prioritization. That is, we are helping an organization make different decisions about where it puts its resources. So, for example, doing a piece of generative or strategic research that helps us understand that we really should be investing in product A over product B. So, we're going to build A and we're not going to build B anymore. Or we're going to build product C before we build product D. Helping an organization decide where it invests its resources is an incredibly important thing and something that is very related to the bottom line. Because anytime an organization spends time doing something, that means it's spending money doing something. So if we are influencing the way that those prioritization decisions happen, that means we are directly influencing how that organization thinks about its resources as well as its bottom line. And then the highest level of impact is strategy. So, impact at the strategic level means helping an organization grapple with the most fundamental questions about itself. What is the problem that we are here to solve? What is the key customer segment we've decided to solve this problem for? Who are our main competitors? What markets do we want to play in? That is the kind of impact that you can have at a strategic level. So these are the 4 levels of impact that I see for UX researchers. And I absolutely believe that we can and we should be making impact at every single level of this pyramid. And we can think about measuring that impact using these 4 different types of metrics. Activity metrics are about things that we are doing as an individual or a team. Internal metrics are about things that change inside our organization, even if an end user customer might not see them. A product metric is the more standard metrics we might be really used to discussing, things like task completion rate or dwell time. And business metrics are the dollars and cents. So activity metric could be something like the number of UX research studies that your team completes or you as an individual complete. It might be something like the percentage of products that have coverage by a UX researcher. An internal metric could be like the number of flows that have been updated on the back of a usability test, or the number of strategy documents that have a UX research rationale. A product metric might be something like task completion rate, dwell time, or number of errors. And a business metric, my favorite, is going to be something like increase in revenue, average order value, or reduction in cost. 4 types of metrics, 4 spaces for influence. And we can take my pyramid on one axis and my metrics on the other axis and make it into a table like this. I think this is a pretty fantastic tool for any team or any individual to work through and to think about what are the metrics that I can credibly say that I am influencing across each of these dimensions. Well, if I can't come up with anything now, where is it that I could credibly influence in the next 3, 6, or 12 months? This is 16 metrics. If you did every single box, that's too many for any single person or even a team, frankly, to focus on in a short period of time. So after using this as an exercise and as a starting point, it's very important to go through a process of prioritization to make sure that you're zeroing in on just the things that really matter. And I do coaching with individuals and organizations on this exact thing if this is something that is standing out to you as being super interesting. I do want to acknowledge also that not all of those metrics will be created as equally as each other. So I think there is an inverse relationship between the ease of influence and importance. So what I mean by that is the metrics that are the easiest to influence, so things like activity metrics, how many studies your team is doing, are probably going to be considered as less impactful and less important by your stakeholders. Like most stakeholders are going to be much less impressed if you say to them, my team did 10 studies versus my team helped increase the average order value across the organization. So it is important to think really critically about the metrics that you prioritize as a team, because we want to find the balance between metrics that are really impactful and exciting to stakeholders, but also ones that we can realistically and credibly influence. We also don't want to be spending all of our time measuring things. We want to be spending as much of our time as possible doing research. And that is a difficult tension that we have to manage in this environment. the last thing I want to say about measuring impact is around risk. So much of what UX researchers do is we reduce risk. For example, we find the issues in a product, the issues in a flow during a usability test. That means those issues do not make it into the hands of the end customer. But because they don't make it into the hands of the end customer, it can be very difficult to kind of point to the impact of something that you prevented from happening. Prevention is always more difficult to talk about and celebrate versus a cure because it didn't happen. So how can we talk about it and how can we explain the impact of something that we prevented from happening? I think that there are ways. I think we can quantify elements of risk. And this is where a lot of my thinking actually started on this exact topic. So for example, as I said, UX researchers prevent errors from reaching users. And we can extrapolate a lot of the time what would have happened if we had not done the work that we had done. And we can extrapolate this from the results of something like a usability test. And not only can we then talk about it qualitatively, as in we prevented this error that would have made customers feel very frustrated, we can actually take it one step further and assign a dollar value to that impact. So for example, if you were doing a usability test and you found a part of your experience where users were just so annoyed, they were really frustrated, and they said to you, I would get on the phone and I would call customer support, or I would be on that chat window and I want to speak to a human, I want to speak to a human until I had someone that could resolve my problem. Anytime we hear that, we really need to be thinking about the impact on the bottom line, because customer support can be very expensive for organizations to run. So anytime someone in your usability test or in your research talks about getting on the phone to customer support, you should be thinking about, I can probably calculate how much that would cost my organization. And you can do it very simply like this. All you need to think about is how many people would use that feature in a given time frame, let's say a month. Of those people, what percent would get on the phone to customer support? And you can kind of extrapolate from your usability test, although we always have to be very careful to draw a quantitative conclusion from qualitative research. So I tend to always make this on the more conservative side rather than on the more kind of generous side. So if in your UT, for example, 50% of people out of your sample of 10 said that they would call, I probably wouldn't say 50% would get on the phone here. You'd also want to benchmark to something like, what's standard for your organization. And then lastly, you just have to multiply that by cost per call. And that's it. And then you get a dollar value about what the impact on your organization would have been if you hadn't found that error, a real dollar value impact. This is the kind of thinking that we can bring into our conversations when it comes to impact of UX researchers. And there's loads more dollar values that we can talk about. I also teach a 1-hour masterclass, very short and sweet, on this exact topic as well. Okay, that was impact. Trend number 2, structure is critical. So UX researchers, we write reports or documents, but we write stuff. We often have to find a way to bring together all of the amazing work that we have done into a document that will explain our point of view and hopefully convince a stakeholder to take a certain action. And I think there are a couple of characteristics that really set apart a good document or a good report from a bad one. Very important. A good report has to answer the research objective, has to address the implications very clearly, and has to be very easy to consume. Your stakeholder should be able to skim this document as well as read it in lots of detail and still get the really important findings, even if they're engaging with it and at a more high level. So in UX, I think it's very common for us to think like this. So we want to think about all of the points of data that we have learned over the course of our study or over the course of our time interacting with customers. And that means we have so many data points. And in fact, the way that most people learn how to do qualitative synthesis is literally to put all of those data points somewhere on a physical wall or on a mirror board or something similar and cluster them in terms of themes. Then from those themes, they create some kind of an insight. And then from those insights, they create some kind of key takeaway, which might be, for example, a recommendation. The temptation then is to take a stakeholder through that exact process that you followed. And I think this often comes from a really generous place in us. We want to share with you all of the amazing things that we have learned. We want to make sure you're as confident and as in the data as we were to see the journey we went on to come to our final conclusion. But I would argue that although we might think like that, we really should be writing like this. So this is a very kind of condensed example of the pyramid principle by Barbara Minto. Like I said, ex-management consultant, this was really drilled into us in terms of the way to write and the way to structure our documents. And it's an incredibly powerful framework if you can master it. But essentially what I want you to take away from this is that starting with that key takeaway, starting with that key recommendation or that most important insight that you believe needs to be prioritized is usually the most compelling way to go. And then from there, you can talk about the rationale behind it and all the data that supports it. But generally, this is going to be much easier for stakeholders to consume and much more compelling to them more quickly because they know what the so what is immediately. I want to caveat this by saying, however, every organization is different and globally cultures differ on this as well. So in some cultural contexts, this is going to be more appreciated than others. So it's very important to understand if this really makes sense in your cultural context and the context of your organization as well. But generally, in my experience, this tends to be more preferred rather than less preferred. And really, it intersects with my philosophy when it comes to a report is that you are making an argument. You are not a neutral observer laying out all of these facts for someone else to come to their own conclusion. You're making an argument. Your argument is probably something like the most important pain point for us to address is X. The product we really need to invest in is Y. Our customers are going to defect from our product unless we fix Z. That is probably what your argument looks like, but you are essentially making an argument and you have a point of view that you are trying to convince someone else of. And that structure of that pyramid is really, really useful in constructing your argument. So if you were trying to argue that A is the most important pain point, how do you know? What are the insights that led you there? You probably have about 3 or 4 or 5 that sit underneath that. And then each of those have their points of data that sit underneath that. So constructing your argument and really thinking through really critically why you believe what you believe, the pyramid is super useful. Then you can use that exact structure to structure out your report. The different sections of it can become your overall report heading, the summary, the heading of your executive summary, your slide, divider slide titles, all the way down through your slide headings and the information on your slide. Thank you for annotating my slides as we go. So in the structure of your report, you use the pyramid, and then it actually is kind of fractal and goes all the way down even into the structure of your slides. So the way that I structure my slides is actually in the same way. I'm going to have the top of the pyramid be the title of the slide, and I use these kind of governing thought titles rather than, for example, something like methodology or takeaway 1. My slide titles are always something that you can just read and understand. Underneath my slide title, I'm going to have, for example, my 3 insights that really support it. And underneath the insight headings, I'm going to have key takeaways and quotes. So using that structure all the way down through my report. And lastly, my advice around creating more impact is to time your insights for impact. So what I mean by this is that it's very important that we understand how our team actually uses insights. We need to identify when in the process teams are using our insights and making sure that we are part of the right conversations at the right times to get our insights used. So for example, is there backlog prioritization meetings that you can be part of? Are there regular cadences around strategy formulation? Are there vision setting or vision alignment settings? And these things can even map back to our pyramid. So strategy formulation and vision alignment are going to be right up the pointy top. Backlog prioritization is something that would exist at that prioritization layer of the pyramid. So what we want to do is match our insights to where they're used. So we really want to think about how can we get our insights into the right company specific cadences. So for example, are there monthly backlog planning meetings? Are there annual vision setting workshops? We want to get our insights into those forums. Of course, we're still going to have our project specific sharing sessions. We don't come up with our projects from nowhere. We're often collaborating with our stakeholders extensively and throughout. So of course you want to share at the end of a project or throughout a project, because we really want to avoid having one grand moment where we reveal everything at the end. As much as possible, we want to be sharing things as we know them and bringing stakeholders on our journey. And also finding ways to share in between projects. What can we do to surface insights that we know already? And sharing a link to your research repository probably isn't quite enough. How can we surface our insights? And I've seen teams do some really cool things here, things like having Slack channels full of insights, having newsletters that they send around. But what can we do to really surface those insights and our impact and our findings in between the projects and in between the other cadences? But essentially, if you take nothing else away from this session, from this section, take away this. The goal is to change the focus of our sharing. So as much as possible, we want to be localizing the sharing of our insights around the decision that stakeholders are making and that we are part of making, rather than the project, because that is where the magic really happens. So where they're making the decision about what to build, what not to build, what order to build it in, what order the screens are going to go in, how the screens are going to be designed, the decision. We want to focus our sharing around the decision rather than here's the project that I've completed this month and I'm sharing the results of my project, the decision over the project. So there are my 3 strategies to create more impact. Track and share your impact, writing really matters, and time your insights. And if you are excited by some of the things that I shared with you, I do have an upcoming cohort of my Maven cohort class called Turbocharge Your UX Research, Write for Impact. It's actually starting on Monday, which is really exciting. And I'm very happy to offer everyone here 15% off with this code UXR Guild 15. I also am super committed to making my teaching accessible. So if the price is still something that is over your budget, please reach out to me. Particularly, I'm very keen on making this course accessible to folks who have experienced layoffs and those who are living in countries with lower purchasing power parity. I know that this course might seem really inaccessible, particularly to folks in Southeast Asia where I live, and I really want to make sure that that's not the case. Last cohort, I offered discounts of 50, 60, and 70% to folks who fell into those categories. So like, I'm really serious when I say this. Please send me a message and please reach out and I'll do my best to accommodate you so you can be part of this course. It was great last cohort. We had tons of fun. I really, really enjoyed it. And it falls into 3 main modules. The first module is all around insights and recommendations. The second one's all around frameworks. And the third one is all about reports and impact statements. So a lot of the kind of ethos of this presentation, but just way more detail and across 3 weeks. And it's like really fun. Someone described my course as self-care, and that was the nicest feedback that I've probably ever been given about a teaching moment. Like I've really thought very hard about how I can balance the idea of delivering content with creating an environment where you're excited to be part of the community, and logging onto the live sessions feels like a pleasure rather than a chore. So it's a pretty lovely environment. And I actually had 2 sets of students in the world meet up in person over the course of the 3-week cohort. So you can see a photo of 2 of them there. They just really connected and wanted to meet in person, which was super cool to see that impact go from online to IRL. So this is the details once again. And that's it from me. Thank you all so much. It's been a pleasure. And I'm sure there are lots of questions in the chat. Very happy to answer them.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ruby. That was terrific. I